So Peter, as we have talked about multiple times, especially through our Lenten journey and into our Easter journey, is kind of a fraught character. As my friend, Reverend Dr. Anthony Scott says, he's kind of the jump first, ask questions later disciple. He is also the cussin' and cuttin' saint, which is what Anthony says, which I appreciate. Peter is what we'll call impulsive, maybe a little. His heart's in the right place. He really wants to be trustworthy. He wants to be Johnny on the spot. He wants to be the guy who will come in clutch. But we have the story of when the rubber actually met the road and he was faced with danger, or he was faced with opposition at the arrest of Jesus, when someone said, "Hey, I know you. You're one of his followers." He said, "No, that's not me. You don't know what you're talking about." And the third time that someone asked him, "Hey, I think I know you. You're with this Jesus guy," he gets angry and denies it, basically using a bunch of obscenities, being like, "No, I am not that person," with some expletives mixed in there. So then we have Jesus appearing to his disciples. We have this is the third time that Jesus has appeared in the Gospel of John. So we've been looking mostly at the Gospel of John. And this is the moment where it bookends and mirrors exactly what Peter went through before Jesus died. He has the opportunity for redemption. So the same way that he was asked, "Do you know this man? Are you part of the Jesus movement?" And he's like, "No." Jesus asks him, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" And the third time, Peter gets in his feelings, similar to how he did in the previous account, and he says, "You know everything. Of course you know that I love you." And he's offered an invitation to feed and tend the lambs. Those defenseless, sometimes kind of not very smart creatures that are a motif throughout the Gospels for this beautiful gathering of people who are really trying to create a community, but who need structure and reminders of how it is that we travel together, because we are so prone to wandering off. How do we stick together? How do we hang on to the vision that Jesus gave to us? How do we live life together? These are the questions that we have been working with prior to, in Lent, and then Easter as the linchpin moment of, okay, we can imagine something different after we know what we don't want. And now we're invited into creating and actively tending the world as we wish to see it. But I want to back up in the text a little bit, because I'm aware that in the absence of Jesus and his active involvement, most of the disciples went back to do the thing that they knew how to do. What was most of their previous occupation? Fishermen, right. So their leader's gone, and they're like, all right, now what? And it's Peter who's like, you know what, I had a job before this. I still know how to do this work. I'm going to go back to do the thing that I know how to do. I'm going fishing. And then everyone around him is like, oh, thank God, we're coming. Someone has to lead us. There's a power vacuum. There's no one is giving us any guidance. There's no structure. We're freaked out. So what are we going to do? We're going to go back to what we know how to do. We understand the water. We understand fish. So we're going to go fishing at night. But then, what happens? They don't catch anything. It doesn't work, right? Oh no, we're being invited into this new way of being. We don't know what we're doing, and then so we go back to the old way, and then it's not working. Cussing and cutting saint, right? Like, I can only imagine the frustration, right? Like, hey, I only have these tools. I only know how to do what I know how to do, and it keeps not working. And just like banging your head against the same problem, right? Like, so I can only imagine, like, all right, I'm just gonna cast this net one more time. Maybe it'll work. And then there's this like guy on the land who already has fish, got a whole charcoal set up, a whole grill, right? Who's like, do it on the other side. Do you think that I didn't rotate? Did you think I didn't try it on the right side? No? Oh, okay, fine. I'll try it on the right side. And suddenly there is abundance. Suddenly, I want to know who counted the fish. 153 is such a specific number. Like, who thought, like 90 years later, we were 60 years later, what do we need to do? We need to, how many fish were there? Right? Because there's not even like a numerology reason behind it. It's not 12, it's not 3, it's 153. Very strange. But, yeah, so I want to know, who, like, I bet it was Thomas. Because Thomas is like the empirics person. He's like, I have to have all the facts, so I bet he was sitting there counting fish. That feels like a Thomas move to me. He's like, there will be no doubt. We have the data. There is data. So there is such abundance. And I wonder how the relief felt in their bodies. Right? They'd been working all night. They were coming to an end of an unfruitful night shift. They were hungry. They were probably frustrated. They were trying to go back to what they knew, but it wasn't working. And then there was something about the presence and the Spirit of Jesus that shifted just a little bit how it was that they approached the situation. And it changed everything. So get curious. There is sort of a reputation for churches around change. I read there was a meme that I read this morning about how different denominations work with change, how they change a light bulb. And most of them was, we don't. Or we form a committee and then we like vote on it, but then it still doesn't change. And I wonder about, all the work we did in Lent, talking about our fears and our anxiety and our grief, and how we don't always have the tools to know what to do with them. But we were starting to be in relationship with them, trying to figure out, is there another way that we can approach how we work with fear, how we work with anger, how we work with loneliness, how we work with betrayal, these huge shadow emotions that we spent so much time with in the Lenten season. But it's easy to just go back to what you know, right? We've all got decades of programming about this is how I do this thing, right? And so I'm sympathetic to all of the disciples who are like, you know what, we're going back and we're going fishing. And I think we think that it has to be some kind of dramatic change for us to shift something in our spirit, to be able to meet ourselves and meet one another with deep compassion. That type of compassion that can shift a system where we can turn toward one another rather than away from one another, where we can work with conflict as opposed to take our ball and go home, or just put up with whatever it is that's causing us stress. But it's not all that dramatic. It's just fishing on the other side, right? It's just trying something a little bit new, trying something again, having an element of trust in the movement of the Spirit, in the Spirit of Jesus who is guiding us to try to be the type of community that we want to be. And just with that little move, that choice in the moment that says, I can respond to this in all of the ways that I know how to do, or I can try something a little different. In that moment, between impulse and action, there is a pause. And in that pause, in that breath, is the movement of the Spirit, where we can listen to that still small voice, or the guy on the beach who says, try the right side. There's abundance here. And who knows what our 153 fish might be. I think both are correct. And then we come to the shore. And what's already waiting for us there? Fish, bread, nourishment, community. There is already a space for us. We have abundance that we are bringing, but there's already abundance available. And that is given with no questions asked. Children, come and eat. There was a gift of some of the fish from the harvest, from the water. But there was already something there. There is a synergy when we bring what we have, when all of us bring what we have. That's why we do potlucks. Spoiler alert, there's one later. Right? That all of us bring something of ourselves, bring a little bit, and then there is always enough. And it is only then, after nourishment, after community, after what I imagine is a joyful reunion for these moments, after they figured out it was Jesus. The text is a little bit strange about that. They're like, do we ask if it's him? Do we know if it's him? I'm like, you spent 3 years with the man. You think you would know. I don't know, maybe not. But there is this beautiful gathering on this beach where they are fed and nourished. And then it's then when Jesus takes Peter aside. And he doesn't rebuke him. We have lots of points in text where Jesus does the finger wag. That's what when the word rebuke comes out, that's the shame finger, right? This strong energy of don't do that, right? You were wrong. That's not how Jesus meets Peter. And I imagine what Peter must have been carrying, knowing that he promised Jesus he would never betray him, never deny him, that he had his life. And knowing that Jesus knew that that wasn't quite true, that Peter was fallible, that it wouldn't shake out the way that Peter imagined. And instead of meeting Peter with anger because of betrayal, because of hurt, because when Jesus needed him to stand up for him, he didn't, he's gentle and invitational. And he just says, do you love me? But he's firm about it. And there's a reason it happens 3 times. Because love requires action. The invitation is feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed them. In the 12-step way of engaging with the world, we don't apologize. We make amends. And that's the lens through which I see this conversation with Peter, that Jesus has with Peter. The difference between apology and amends, apology is saying, I'm sorry for my actions, but it doesn't necessarily bring with it an action that shifts something. Amends, on the other hand, is saying, what, if anything, can I do to make up for the wrong that I have caused you, the harm that I have caused you? Sometimes that is just, that comes from the person who's been harmed. That they can say, make financial restitution to me because this is, this cost me something. They can say, just don't do it again, or any number of ways. But it is a physical shift in behavior, shift in action, because there has been wrongdoing. And so Peter, I don't know if he knew he was being invited to an amends conversation, but it is what it wound up being. Do you love me? If you love me, that means something. That requires something of you. But it requires something different than you thought it required several weeks ago. It doesn't require an act of courage and bravery. It requires small acts of tending. It requires nourishment for others, to give of yourselves, to be a caregiver, to be a tender. That word, tending, tender. I don't know that is a word that Peter would have ascribed to himself basically ever, right? He's the cussing and cutting saint, right? You need someone to go to war? I'm on it. But he's being invited to not use the tools that he had before. He's being invited to lay down his sword. He's being invited not to one big act of courage, but instead to an act over and over and over again of tending and commitment that will shift everything about his life, shift everything about how he knows how to do what he does. It isn't a place for guilt. Jesus actually doesn't make any room for it. There is no big apology. Peter actually never apologizes. He's just invited into a new way of being, saying, if you love me, this is what it requires. So I get curious for us, right? If churches have a difficulty with transformation, if we have a difficulty with change, if we've all been habituated to act in a particular way when we're faced with particular circumstances, what are we being invited to do in the pause? What have we been invited to do more than once? What do we say when we're faced with it? Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that. Really? Okay. When do we get into our feelings? When do we get hurt that we're still dealing with that same question, whatever that question is? Another life lesson. It's the same one I've been dealing with for the last decade, but it keeps coming back. But we're offered an opportunity. Shift something. Do something different. Tend. Feed. And how might that shift how we feel about ourselves? There's lots of times where we talk about behavior, about ripping it out from the roots, right? Like weeding it out of ourselves. And yet, the actual transformational invitation is tending, is love, is feeding, is being met with excessive gentleness, is trying just something a little bit different, not radically different, and seeing what abundance might be present. And so, dear ones, that's the invitation of this time. As we prepare for the next steps that it takes, that we prepare for in the course of the story to allow Jesus to ascend back into heaven, and we are left figuring out for ourselves what it means to be Christian. May we be exceedingly gentle. May we nourish one another. May we tend one another. May we love one another. And may we try something just a little bit different. Amen.